Hi, I'm Josh Birx. I'm so grateful that you joined us for this online summer seminar this year. I began teaching over 20 years ago, junior high history and Bible, and I love those classes. As the Lord saw fit, He moved me to senior high and then eventually to be the principal of the high school. In 2012, I became the administrator of Pensacola Christian Academy. So I've kind of had a bird's eye view of sorts of a K through 12 school setting. You know, a lot of people, when they think of schools, they think of discipline. Oh, those unruly children. And I'm sure if you're anything like me, that you've had some opportunities to interact with children and their parents in a positive, reinforcing way. This session today, I hope, will be an encouragement and a help to you to give you some tips on how do we effectively handle discipline in the school setting. But first, I want to ask this question. Why is discipline even necessary? I'd say there's two basic reasons for the need for discipline. And the first is simply we need to accomplish learning. That's what school is all about. And if we don't have a structure where we can accomplish learning effectively, then we miss the point of having a school. You think back to many years ago, the one-room schoolhouses. How did children in a one-room schoolhouse learn? I think back even to my grandfather, who only had an 8th grade education. How was it that children years ago could spend less time in school, but they seemed to learn more than children today? A lot of that has to do with the discipline. There's a lot of wasted time in classrooms across this country dealing with discipline problems. If we had better discipline in our schools, our children could learn more. The second reason for the need for discipline in our schools is for the fact that we simply need to instill positive character traits. James Madison, the father of our Constitution, one of the founding fathers of our country, he said, "Government is necessary because men are not angels." By that statement, he was referring to the sin nature of mankind. He recognized that we are not angelic. We have a natural bent towards doing wrong. And unless there's some governing force in our life, we're probably going to do what's wrong. And so for those two reasons, to accomplish learning and to teach positive character traits, discipline's necessary. But discipline's not always easy. But there are some key tips that can help us. Before I get into some very practical tips, I want to lay a foundation by sharing 3 couplets with you. These couplets will kind of give you something to hold on to in your memory as we move forward. The first is this: training and restraining. Effective discipline involves training and restraining. Proverbs 2:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So training is teaching. It's not just reacting. Often we view discipline as a reaction to a student's misbehavior, but training is actually proactive. It's teaching. It's thinking ahead. It's realizing my students are not prepared to do right by their own nature. And so by God's grace, I'm going to give them some tools to help them do right. I recognize the path that they are charted for in their own nature, and I want to help them choose a better path. So I'm going to be proactive. I'm going to be training. So administrators, I would encourage you with this reality. Help your teachers remember that the perspective that they should have in the classroom is that they're inheriting students who have a bent towards doing wrong just as much as they're inheriting students who have an ignorance of the subject matter. No teacher would expect a student coming into kindergarten already knowing how to read. And no teacher should expect a student to come into kindergarten with a model character either. We're training in both areas. So we want to get out in front of it. We want to do right for our students. And it takes time to teach students what is acceptable behavior. The pressure should not be on the teacher to have a perfect classroom. Rather, the pressure should be on the teacher to train the students in the way of doing right. If a student fails a test, what does the teacher do? The teacher circles back around, reconnects with that student and their parents, offers some helps, tutors perhaps, but they reach out. If a student fails a character test, what should the teacher do? The same thing. We circle back around, we recognize the fact that we're not where we need to be, and we lovingly bring them along. So discipline, effective discipline, involves training and restraining. 1 Samuel chapter 3 is the account of the Lord talking to Samuel. And the Lord gave Samuel a message about Eli. And the message was not a positive one. The Lord said this in 1 Samuel 3, verse 13, to Samuel about Eli. He says, "For I have told him," referring to Eli, "that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. So why was Eli chastened by God? Why did Eli lose the position that the Lord had given to him? It's not because his sons did wrong. It's because he knew his sons were doing wrong and he didn't do anything to correct them. So training is necessary, but so is restraining. So training needs to take place first. You could picture it like this. It's a biblical principle. If an authority figure loves the person who's under them, that authority figure will bring chastening into their life when they're wrong. The Lord says it. He says, who I love, I chasten. He expects parents. If you love your children, you'll chasten them. And he expects us as teachers, administrators, to bring chastening in the lives of our students when necessary. So training is important. It's getting out in front of it. Restraining means preventing further misbehavior. So it's a deterrent. In your school, what would a deterrent look like to prevent further misbehavior if a child does what's wrong? It could be something as simple as a loss of privilege. It could be hide your eyes. That's an expression for putting your head down and closing your eyes. Some time out, perhaps. It could be separation to the back of the classroom. It could be that, hey, they were a line leader and they lose the privilege to be a line leader. There needs to be some step that's noticeable by that child so that they realize I cannot keep going down the road I was going down and still be blessed in that manner. It may be a phone call to the parent. Some kind of intervention needs to take place. Effective discipline evokes the proper response from the teacher and prevents future misbehavior. Training and restraining is truly disciplining out of love. And the longer you work in this ministry, the more you see the positive fruits of that. I think back to one of the years when I was teaching. I had a student who, as I had given a test and graded it and passed it back to go over with the class, the student came up to me after class and showed me her test copy and said, Mr. Birx, you marked this wrong, but as you can see, I actually got the answer right. And I had seen on her test copy that it had been erased and the correct answer was there. Now, I knew that I graded that test very carefully, but I took her at her word and I gave her credit for that question that she claimed I had marked incorrectly. However, there was a seed of doubt that was planted in my mind moving forward. So the next time I gave the test, I actually made a copy of her test as I was grading it. I passed it back to the class, and sure enough, on that test, she came forward and said, Mr. Birx, you marked this wrong, but I actually got it right. And she showed me. Well, I had the proof that she was lying to me, and she was trying to get her score adjusted. We call that cheating. So we dealt with her according to school policy. Do you know what she did? She came back to me in tears, apologizing. She was caught doing wrong, and we intervened. And rather than continuing down that road of wrongdoing and dishonesty, she admitted, she repented, and the relationship was restored, and she was able to move forward with good character. I had another student one time. You may think, Mr. Birx, do you have a bunch of cheaters in your class? No, I have a bunch of students who are sinners, and that's just normal, that's natural. Another student that I was referring to, that this other student, she cheated on a Bible verse. So she was writing on a Bible verse, and she was dishonest about that. And she was caught, and we dealt with it according to school policy. Later on, we were taking another Bible verse quiz, and it was graded, and she brought it back up to me and said, Mr. Birx, this wasn't marked wrong, but I actually missed it. Wow, what a benefit, what fruit was born out of the intervention that we had taken in previous accounts. Now, will every student automatically turn around and show you a new leaf just like that? No, but those are success stories. And God plants them in our lives so that we can see them to encourage us to continue on the biblical path that He's charting for us. So, effective discipline involves training and restraining. The second couplet that I want to share with you today is effective discipline is predicated upon unity and consistency. Effective discipline is predicated upon unity and consistency. We have to be unified as a school. So, school administrator, I would encourage you spend a considerable amount of time in this area. How can you unify your school in the area of discipline? A well-disciplined school is that school in which there is a school-wide emphasis on the importance of learning. and an absolute intolerance for any condition that impedes learning. So there's a school-wide emphasis on the importance of learning and an absolute intolerance for any condition that impedes learning. We need to know the biblical mandate for discipline before we're unified. Now, keep in mind that Proverbs and much of Scripture is written to parents about how to discipline or how to chasten their children. And it's important that we keep those in context, that those are written to parents specifically. And a school should not be taking the exact same steps of discipline that a parent may take, but the principles are important. So Proverbs 23 verses 13 and 14 says, "Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell." So that passage is talking about corporal punishment. And please understand that that old King James word beat is not referring to abuse. It's referring to just a good old-fashioned spanking. Now, you may serve in a school, in an area where corporal punishment is still legal in your area. I would caution you about taking that step. That's a step that's reserved to parents in the home. But the principle is important. The principle is this: parents, intervene in the life of your child with a Bible-based discipline. And by doing so, you can deliver your child from hell. That doesn't mean that brings salvation to your child. What it means is you're teaching biblical principles about what's right, what's wrong, and how they should live. And as a child puts themselves in proper relation to their earthly authority, they're in much better understanding of their proper relationship to their heavenly authority. Proverbs 29:15 says this: "The rod and reproof." The rod and reproof. So that's the penalty, but it's also the instruction that goes with it. "The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame." I saw this fulfilled, sadly, very literally one time. We dealt with a child in our school who had been posting things online that were absolutely vile. They were reprehensible. They were disgusting. As we had to take disciplinary action, we called the mom in, and I did not want to give all of the details to the mom because, quite frankly, the child was posting things about the mom that I knew would break the mom's heart. And so I tried to speak in general terms about what the child was posting. The mom didn't believe me. She said there's no way she could be doing that. I only leave her home alone about an hour or two a day. She couldn't be doing that. So unfortunately, I had to show her the proof, the actual printed out copies of what the child had been posting. The mom broke down in tears. She was hurt. She was humiliated. She was embarrassed. Why? Because her daughter had been left alone to her own devices. James Madison said, "Government's necessary because men are not angels." He's not necessarily referring to civil government, although that's part of it. He's referring to an authority structure. And that young lady had been missing an authority structure in her life on a daily basis, even though for a short window, and unfortunately she made very wrong decisions. This can be avoided if we are unified in our understanding for the importance of discipline. So unity and consistency. Be unified on the structure of discipline according to school policy as directed by the faculty manual and the principal. We need to be unified. We need to be consistent. So unified with the reason, consistent with the application. Now, administrators, I probably don't need to tell you this, but there are basically two categories of rules that we may have in our school. One is biblically based rules. The other are institutional rules. So we have some rules because the Bible demands it. There's no getting around it. We have some rules because in order to function effectively and well as a school, we have to have order. So they're not a Bible mandate, but we need to have some order. And for consistency's sake, we should have similar applications in each scenario. For instance, let's start with some Bible-based rules. The Bible teaches that all men need to be honest. So if a child lies, do you have a penalty structure in place that has a consistent application for penalty for lying? If a child steals, do you have a consistent penalty structure in place so that any child who steals is not subject to the whims or the moods or the arbitrariness of who's dealing with them, but there's actually a school structure in place. Respect, morality, modesty, distinction. These are all areas that the Bible addresses. And so we'll have Bible-based expectations, and we'll have some rules, some penalties that are appropriate and age appropriate. Do you have a structure like that? It shouldn't be a question in any of your teachers' minds or your administrators' minds what to do when something like this happens. There should be a range of penalty that is appropriate for that rule violation. Now, you also have some rules, I'm sure, that are specific to your school. Maybe your school says no students should chew gum. Now, there's no Bible mandate against gum chewing. But quite frankly, your custodian is tired of peeling all the gum off the bottoms of tables and desks and out of the carpet. And so you simply institute a school rule, no gum at school. Fine. It's pretty minor, but it's an important one. Any rule worth having is a rule worth enforcing. So if a child's caught chewing gum, is there a standardized penalty structure? There needs to be, if we're going to be consistent in our application. One teacher should not give one penalty and a different teacher a different penalty. That breeds bitterness in the hearts of students. It takes away their feeling of security. They should understand that no matter where I go in this school building, the penalty will be the same depending on the infraction. Maybe you have penalty structures for tardiness, or being unprepared, or running in the hallway, or horseplay. These are all institutional rules for the safety and the well-being of your school. I encourage you, have a manual for your teachers that they know if this happens, this is how I respond. If this happens, this is how I respond. That leads to consistency within a school. Everyone handles it the same way every day, creating uniform expectations. It makes the children feel safe and avoids bitterness. Teachers who have not figured out exactly what they want or don't want is often the root cause for much of what follows. What about in the classroom? I'd encourage your teachers to keep the rules very broad-based and very simple. Rules such as no communication without permission. And by the way, I say that word communication intentionally. I didn't say talking. As you know, a child can define talking in a very narrow scope, but communication is much broader. That covers sign language, it covers audible words, it covers messages being sent, it covers the paper airplane that's flying across the room with a message in it. So it covers a broad range. So no communication without permission. No getting up out of your seat without permission. Eyes towards the front. Those 3 basic classroom rules can pretty much set a good tone in the classroom. A teacher doesn't need to keep giving more and more and more rules. Keep them very broad-based, very simple. Children understand it, it's easy to enforce, and it makes for a successful school day. Handle every situation in a timely and a consistent manner before future misbehavior is established. Now, if you don't have Ecclesiastes 8:11 memorized and written, perhaps on a small placard in your office, I'd encourage you to do that. Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, "Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil." I'll read it again. "Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil." In other words, if you let someone get away with an infraction to a rule and you don't even address it, you don't say anything about it, they will continue doing the same thing. It's our human nature. I was visiting a local store one time, one of these large stores, big box stores. And as you walk in they have a kind of a foyer area with drinking soda machines. And they have their generic brand for like 25 cents a piece, and then they have their name brand soda machines. I went to the generic brand, I was looking at the options there, and I heard sensed some commotion here off to my side out of my peripheral vision. After a while, I looked over, and there was a gentleman at that soda machine, the name brand soda machine, with a smile from ear to ear on his face. And what he was doing was he was taking a drink out of the little receiver box, putting it in his arm. Another one dropped down, he'd take that, put it in his arm. Another one dropped down, he'd take that, put it in his arm. It was basically unloading that drink, that soda machine, one at a time. And he looks at me, he says, It's giving out free drinks. Want one? So here's an opportunity. And I've presented this scenario to my students sometime. I said, what is the appropriate response in a situation like that? Sadly, a lot of students, and even sadder, a lot of adults would say, hey, the machine's broken. That was the store's responsibility to keep it working correctly. Since they didn't pay attention, it's not working correctly. Finders keepers, losers weepers, right? Well, that's not a biblical approach to this. The biblical approach is, who owns that property? Those sodas. Well, the store does. Have they been purchased? Have they been paid for? Have they been taken with permission? If none of those things are true, then what's the Bible word for what's taking place in that scenario? It's stealing. And as I talk about that with my students sometimes, again, we come back to James Madison's statement. Government is necessary because men are not angels. We can justify just about anything in our life. I declined his offer for the free drink. Quite frankly, it wasn't his to give. When I went inside, I told one of the clerks, I said, hey, your soda machine out there is broken, and it's continuing to drop down drinks without someone paying for it. As I did my shopping and as I left that store, I looked over, and there was an employee of the store sitting on the bench directly across from that soda machine. She was guarding it until it could be fixed. That government was established right there so that the future individuals who would come and access that soda machine would have a guard. They'd have a government over their non-angelic tendencies. Get the first offender, or else it becomes a problem individually and collectively. Because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Proverbs 19:18 says, chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. Unity and consistency is knowing and implementing the plan for discipline. And it pays off. Unity and consistency. My very first year teaching, I was teaching junior high, and I understand I grew up in a household of boys. So there were 5 of us boys in our household, and our mom and our dad. So I did not have sisters, and I had very few girl cousins. So I grew up in a guy's household. One of the biggest challenges I had as a new teacher was how to handle junior high girls. Well, I had one girl in my class who was pretty close to angelic. She really was a good kid. I had another girl in my class, same class, who was quite the opposite. This girl loved the attention of getting in trouble. Now, I didn't have an adversarial relationship with her. I think she just enjoyed the attention of doing wrong and getting some attention and getting in trouble. So I had many, many encounters with her already over very simple things. Anything from chewing gum to talking in class to not turning in homework, things like that. One day as I was in class, I saw one of the girls chewing gum. And this girl was one who I knew her dad, good family. She never got in trouble for anything. And I called her name and I said something about her having gum, and I said, you need to spit that out and see me after class. See me after class is code for there's something that we need to deal with, and we'll take care of it after class rather than holding up the whole class to deal with it. So in the back of my mind as I'm teaching that period, I'm thinking, what am I going to do about this? I knew what our faculty manual said. A faculty manual said chewing gum is 1 day of detention, meaning staying after school for an hour and working on some work. But I also knew that I didn't want to do that because she's a good kid. All she needs is a reminder, right? But unity and consistency, that's coming back to my mind. I know that I had already given detentions out to other students in that class for chewing gum. So as she comes to my desk after class, I'm still struggling internally. What should I do? I knew what I wanted to do, but I also knew what I needed to do, and they didn't match. As she comes to my desk, this other young lady who I've mentioned has been in trouble numerous times, but not today, she comes up and interrupts our conversation. And she looks at her and says, you're going to get a detention because that's what happens when you chew gum. Do you know what the Lord did that day to this first year teacher? He sent an angel. That's what she was that day. She was an angel because I needed that boost to do what's right, to be consistent. I wasn't fully prepared to do it. And yet she gave me that final boost because she's the one who declared, this is the offense, this is the penalty, No emotions need to be involved. It's nothing personal. That's just what we're doing to do right. And because she declared it, that gave me that little boost that I needed to implement it that day. Yes, that young lady was in tears. She was embarrassed. She didn't like being in trouble. But you know what was needed? It was needed for consistency. And we all learned a valuable lesson that day. I'm thankful that the Lord intervenes sometimes to give us those opportunities, those reminders when even our character is weak, to strengthen us. So effective discipline is predicated upon unity and consistency. Effective discipline requires command and control. Command and control. What is command? It's authority. We need to be the right kind of authority. You're probably familiar with Romans chapter 13. First 7 verses deal with God-given authority. I'll read just a few of those expressions. In verse 1, the powers that be are ordained of God. Verse 2, the ordinance of God. Verse 4, the minister of God to thee for good. He is the minister of God. Verse 5, for conscience sake we're to obey. You know what that passage is teaching us? That even the teachers in your school are ordained of God to represent him. That's a weighty responsibility. If I want to represent God, wow, that means I need to have the character of God. Authority comes from God. We have his power behind us. We represent him. We are not God. We ought never to claim to be, but we represent him. A good authority denies himself. You know, Pontius Pilate did not deny himself when Christ was on trial. Pontius Pilate recognized that Christ was innocent. He did not deserve any punishment, and yet he had the pressure of the crowd. He had the pressure of his job performance. What if Caesar hears about this uproar? Pilate was more concerned about keeping things quiet than he was about justice. He tried to recuse himself by saying, I wash my hands of this matter. But by that very act, because Pilate was the authority, by that very act, Pilate took a side, and it was the wrong side. Pilate didn't deny himself, and for that, he stands accountable before God. There may be times when I need to deny things that I personally would prefer to have. Sometimes my time, sometimes my popularity. I need to deny things that I would prefer to have, but for the sake of this situation, I can't, because I represent God. I represent his power, and I need to represent his character. So I represent God's attributes. So as I'm disciplining, what am I showing? I should be showing love, mercy, grace, justice. These are all God's attributes. I represent him. So command is important, being the right kind of authority. To do this means we'll be disciplining out of love, never belittling, never humiliating, never embarrassing. Administrators, you may have teachers on your staff, or maybe even you have the propensity to do this, to use sarcasm. That seems to be a common trend these days, especially amongst young people, is to be sarcastic. I'd caution you about that. Sarcasm is a very quick ticket to ruining a potentially profitable situation. I'll give you an example from my own life. I was teaching seniors one year. So these are 12th graders, and I had taught these students before. So they were not new students to me. I was not a new teacher. We had known each other for some time. I was giving a quiz that morning, and you can probably relate to this. One thing that I really don't enjoy is giving makeup quizzes and makeup tests when students are absent. So as much as possible, I like students to be present. Everyone take the quiz, everyone take the test, grade them, and be done with it, and not have to follow up and give individual quizzes and tests to students. We had started the quiz. We got about one question into it or so. The door opens, and in walks one of my students. And so I thought, aha, that's one less makeup quiz I need to give. I called the young lady's name. I said, have a seat. We're taking quiz. Take out 2 sheets of paper and a pen. And so I give a moment for her to come, claim her seat, and she can't find her paper or pen. She's rummaging around. So keep in mind, she's already come in late. We've waited on this quiz for her. Now she can't find her stuff. And I looked at her with a smile on my face, and I said something along the lines of, are you prepared for anything today? Now, I had a smile on my face. That smile was trying to mask my frustration because I truly was frustrated. So what do we call that? We call that sarcasm. And you know what I saw her face do when I said that? Tears streaming down her face immediately. I broke her spirit that morning because of my sarcastic comment. It wasn't necessary, and I broke her spirit. I lost an opportunity. Now, thankfully, I was able to apologize later and make that right. But what does a teacher do when they ruin an opportunity like that right in front of their class? It's too late to say I'm sorry right there. That's going to seem empty. So I followed up later. I apologized to her. Thankfully, she forgave me. But you know, that can happen a lot if sarcasm is a regular tool that we use. One thing that I've thought is helpful to us, it's helpful to me personally when interacting with students to avoid sarcasm, is to be well rested. I find that when I'm tired, I tend to be more edgy. Sarcasm slips out. It's important to get a good night's sleep. So command and control. Control of what? Control of my reactions. Ephesians 6:4, Colossians 3:21, both of these are addressed to fathers as they're dealing with their children. Ephesians 6:4 says, "And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." Colossians 3:21, "Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged." Why do you think that message is to fathers? Why do you think it's dealing with provoking them? Because we as men tend to have this propensity for just barging into a situation without fully considering all the facts or even the emotions of the people we're dealing with. We need to take time and consider that. We're dealing with image bearers, people that God created in His image, who are tender in His sight, and they should be tender in ours as well. Command and control is empowering to the teacher to carry out daily tasks. So administrators, I would encourage you to share these couplets with your teachers, with your team. They're so important. Review them regularly, and then lead to this principle. Because you'll have some new teachers on your staff who they find this a little bit intimidating to do. Wow, what do I do with all these students? Or the students are bigger than I am, they're taller than I am. What do I do with this? Or I'm barely much older than they are. Maybe I'm only 6 years older than my students, 5 years older. How do I do that? 2 Timothy 1:7 is a verse that the Apostle Paul, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, gave to young Timothy. Timothy was struggling with some things. Timothy was living right, but boy, he seemed to be oppressed with some poor health and even some discouragement. And Paul said this about their God. He said, "Timothy, for God hath not given us the spirit of fear." We don't have to be afraid. If there is fear in your life, administrator, or the lives of one of your teachers, that is not the Spirit of God. What is the Spirit of God? Paul goes on to tell Timothy, "But of power and of love and of a sound mind." So those three things are what the character qualities that we should have as teachers, as administrators, as we deal with young people. Power. That's confidence in what is right and who we represent. Love. That's our heart reaching out, the motive behind what we're doing. And sound mind. We should have good rationale for what we're doing. It shouldn't just be blind. It shouldn't just be a gut reaction. A sound mind. 2 Timothy 1:7, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Now, administrator, I've got 10 tips for you to share with your teachers. I'd encourage you to do this every year. They should know these very well. And as you do this, as they know these well, a good teacher will not have to rely on punishments to have good order in the classroom. My first year teaching, I mentioned that one of our school policies was for minor infractions, it would be a day of detention. It's an hour after school the student would have to stay. And I thought I was being a good teacher by regularly assigning these detentions. You talked, detention. You chew gum, detention. Regularly assigning this. I went and talked to our dean, and I was talking about the detentions I'd been giving. And he said, some of our veteran teachers don't usually have to give detentions. I was intrigued by that statement. They don't have to give detentions. How did they do that? Well, they followed these 10 tips. Now, he didn't say they never give detentions, just not frequently. With these 10 tips put into practice, discipline actually tends to go away because the students are fully engaged and they're on board. Not always. Remember, the character's not perfect. There are times that we have to intervene. But as a general rule, a classroom is an orderly classroom. So follow along with me as I share these 10 tips with you. Share them with your teachers. Number 1, learn your school policies and relate to them. Learn your school policies and relate to them. So I mentioned earlier, you should have very clear school policies. If this is the type of infraction, this is the type of penalty. And empower your teachers to follow through with that. Don't question them. Don't pull the rug out from under them. Trust them. Give them that responsibility. But if I don't know what they are, boy, ignorance is debilitating, isn't it? It's destructive. Let's say that I'm a first-year teacher, and I know, okay, we're not supposed to chew gum in our school. You chewed gum, I'm going to give you 5 days of detention for chewing gum. That's not the school policy. We can't just do what we feel like. We have to be unified and consistent in that. So learn school policies and relate to them. What do I mean by relate to them? Have you ever seen a child who kind of pits dad versus mom? He knows that mom has a soft spot here and dad has a soft spot here. And depending on what that child wants, he'll play one versus the other. Sometimes teachers do that as well. So encourage your teachers. Hey, the pronouns that we use when we're referring to our school is we. It's us. Teachers should be referring to school policies as our policies. Not their policies, those people in the office. It's our policies. Our policies. We, us. These personal pronouns. Not they, them. There shouldn't be a disconnect when talking to parents or students. Everything should be unified. Administrators, that goes for you as well. Teachers are not they. Teachers are us. We're all unified in this. So learn your school policies and relate to them. Secondly, visualize yourself in calm control. Okay, so a sports analogy. I think of football players as they are about to take the field. What are they usually doing? They're usually very physically active and being very vocal as well. Contrast that with a slalom skier who's preparing to go downhill. That slalom skier is usually at the top of the hill, often with their eyes closed, thinking of those different flags, those different markers that they have to go through. They've got the course memorized. And in their mind, they're working through that memorized course, anticipating each of the succeeding flags. Or a figure skater who knows they have an established routine. I need to follow through with this routine. So as we approach discipline, our approach should not be like the football player where it's, huh! Rather, our approach should be like that figure skater or the slalom skier. Hey, there's an order, there's a process to this. And I've got this. I'll just think through it and it'll be just fine. I had a student, years ago, I was substituting in a class. So I was substituting in a senior high level class. These were 12th graders. So I knew the students, but not real well. They knew me, but not real well. I was not their teacher. I was going over a homework assignment. And one of the young men kind of mumbled out an answer. And I, as kindly as I think I can, I asked him to repeat the answer, but a little bit louder. And his response was in complete anger. He looked at me, angry, pointed his finger at me, says, "Why don't you say it a little bit louder?" Just like that. As a teacher, I was blown away. I didn't feel that I'd done anything to provoke that response. I didn't feel that there was anything that merited that response. It was absolutely disrespectful. Now, we have a policy. How do we handle disrespect in a school setting? We actually have 2 layers. For minor disrespect, it's handled by the teacher one-on-one. So when I say minor disrespect, I'm referring to a one-on-one conversation. If a student rolls their eyes at the teacher or something like that, it's not done publicly, it's just done one-on-one. We have certain protocols for that. But we also have protocols for major disrespect, something done publicly in front of a group, and this is exactly what happened. Because we were familiar with the school policies, I was able to just calmly respond, "I need you to step out into the hallway and I'll talk to you there." I was able to step out in the hallway and take it from there. I was prepared. Because I'm a great teacher? No, but because we had a great system in place. I was prepared for that event. So visualize yourself in calm control. As a young teacher, and this is what you're sharing with your teachers, they should think through what discipline scenarios they may face in the classroom during the school day and how they would respond to them. So think through. If a student was disrespectful to me, how would I respond? If a student doesn't turn in homework, how would I respond? If a student cheats on a test, how would I respond? Thinking through all these scenarios, because it likely will happen at some point, and we need to be prepared. I imagine in your school you have fire drills regularly, correct? Why? Because you're trying to build in that muscle memory, the routine response to an emergency. Preparing for discipline shouldn't be any different. Muscle memory. I'm preparing for a future event that likely will happen at some time. So visualize yourself in calm control. Keep your class moving. We have found it to be so successful. The more active, especially in young ages, the more active the students are physically, the more cooperative they will be with the teacher. As the students get older, the more we engage them mentally, the more cooperative they will be with the teacher. Number 3, third tip, model professionalism. Be friendly, but not chummy. Model professionalism. Now, this is particularly challenging in a small school setting. So if you have a small school administrator, I'd encourage you to be careful. It's very easy in a small setting to let your guard down as a teacher. Let's say that there's only 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 students in a class. It's very easy to, well, we're just kind of family here. There needs to be a level of professionalism, particularly in small settings. There should be professionalism. Why? It gives the students a model of how they should act when they get older. At some point, they'll need to go for a job interview. At some point, they'll have a situation where they're employed. They need to understand what professional behavior looks like. Number 4, dress appropriately. Dress appropriately. Your dress, your teacher's dress, is a reflection of who you are. I read a book by John Ashcroft many years ago. He was the former governor of Missouri and then later became Attorney General of the United States. He wrote a book that was referring to lessons that he learned from his father. And in that book, one of the lessons he said he learned that his dad taught him was, John, don't dress for the position that you have, dress for the position that you want in the future. Don't dress for the position that you have, dress for the position that you want in the future. One of the reasons why we dress professionally is so that we can model professional dress for our students. We want them to know what they should look like when they go for a job interview. We want them to know what they should look like as they enter the workforce, to give an example for them. So dress appropriately. Don't be too trendy. We don't need to follow every last fashion and trend, but don't be weird. Don't be outdated. Be current. Be modern. Number 5, remain a mystery to your class. Remain a mystery to your class. You can probably complete this famous statement. Familiarity breeds contempt. Familiarity breeds contempt. The more familiar I am with something, the more tendency I have to disdain that thing which I'm familiar with. Sometimes we see that in foods. We may like a food, we eat a lot of that food, we get sick of that food. It's no different with relationships sometimes. Familiarity breeds contempt. Be a challenge. Students should not know everything about a teacher's dating life. There is something to remain a mystery. Number 6, set and keep your policies. Set and keep your policies. Beginning on day 1, set and keep your policies. I say your, that's what you're referring to your teachers, because the school policies are their policies. We own them. We took ownership of them. A policy not worth enforcing is a policy not worth having. And one unenforced policy is all it takes to undermine all the rest. Back in 1794, there was a tax that was placed on whiskey, on alcoholic beverages. And there were a lot of farmers in western Pennsylvania who relied on turning their corn, their grain, into alcohol so that it could be shipped and sold better. So there was an uprising. The event is known as the Whiskey Rebellion, 1794. George Washington was president at that time, and this was one of the first great trials that he had to face. It was a domestic trial as president. What should he do about this rebellion that's taking place? These farmers literally were taking up arms and preparing to fight about this tax that they didn't like. George Washington responded in force, and he basically said this. He said, you may not like the tax. That's fine. Change the law. You may not like it. That's fine. Change it by the procedures that are in place to do so. But until it's changed, he said, I, as the executor of the law, will enforce it. And he put the rebellion down. He set an incredibly important precedent for our country in that event. The precedent was this: people have a say in what the laws are. Take responsibility for getting good laws. But secondly, once the laws are in place, whether or not you like it or not does not provide an option of whether or not to obey it. He said, I will enforce it, even though it's not popular, until it's changed. Set and keep your policies. Number 7, learn to see what's happening while you teach. Now, you can't do this if you're not prepared. We regularly challenge our teachers. Don't come to school without being 100% prepared. Be prepared. Why does that matter? If I'm looking at my notes and I'm trying to fumble through my book to see what my next points are and what I'm doing, if I'm collecting things, my eyes are down, they're not on my students. I need eye contact to know how they're progressing. I need eye contact to give accountability to my students. So eye contact is important. Be prepared, plan well, be alert, make a good eye contact. Don't turn your back on the class. Number 8, catch the first offender. This is key. This is so important. Catch the first offender. You can bank on it. Students will do what's wrong. Let's say that a teacher is struggling with keeping talking down in the class, just constant talking, constant nagging, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Okay, make a statement. Students, we are not going to talk out in this class. And if you do, this will be the penalty. You can bank on it that someone will test the limits. So sometimes what I've done in the past when I have a class that's kind of just a bit unruly, I'll make a statement like that, and then I'm looking, who will be that first offender? Now, I don't dare them, but inside I'm thinking that's going to happen. My job is to catch the first one. Not the second one, not the third one, but the first one. What happens if you catch the second one? Well, the students assume that the teachers see everything, right? That's just an assumption that's made about the teachers. They see everything. So if the first student who talked didn't get penalized, but the second one did, that means the teacher's playing favorites. We don't want that. We don't want bitterness. So it's important that we catch the first one. Number 9, teach students to respond properly to correction or start over. If, when a student's corrected, they slam their books down, they roll their eyes, they kind of throw themselves down in a heap. Any form of disrespect, if it's not correct, sometimes they won't make eye contact. They refuse to look at you. If a student's not responding correctly, start over. Remember, what we're trying to teach is character. We're not just trying to hand out disciplinary penalties. So if we've handed out a penalty but the character's still not there, then we haven't accomplished what we need to. So teach students to respond correctly or start over. Number 10, recognize students doing right. Recognize students doing right. Praise them openly or discreetly, depending on their age level. You've probably learned this. Younger students love to be praised publicly. They love it. They thrive on that. And the rest of the class follows after that. The older the students get, the less public praise they want for doing right. But you know what? If you have an older student and you call them privately, one-on-one, and say, Bill, I've noticed how you've been conducting yourself in class lately. I really appreciate that. It shows a great sign of character and maturity. One of those conversations privately with an older student goes a long way. Recognize them doing right. We kind of have this unwritten rule for our teachers. If you're going to make a phone call to a parent about a discipline problem, you need to have preceded that with a phone call to the same parent about something that's good. You establish relationships that way. So praise. That way when your chastening comes, they know that you love them. These 10 tips, I encourage you to share them with your teachers on an annual basis, every single year. They're valuable. They're helpful. Now, I've got a few more tips for you as an administrator. What happens when major discipline takes place? When it comes to your office, because it's more than just routine class things that a teacher can handle. What steps should you take? Very quickly, 5 steps for you as an administrator. Number 1, be prompt. Be prompt. Don't delay. Don't put it off. Be timely in your approach to that discipline. Remember Ecclesiastes 8:11, because sentence against an evil work was not executed speedily. So we need to be prompt. That's a biblical basis for our discipline. Be prompt. Number 2, in order to be prompt, we have to give it high priority. Give it high priority. Quite frankly, when discipline happens around here, when the need for discipline happens, everything else stops because it has to be a high priority. Why? It's the twofold part of our education. Yes, academics is important, and so is character. And we're a school. That's a high priority for us. Number 3, do your homework. It's a dangerous thing for your school if you venture into a potential discipline situation without all the facts. You think you have all the facts, but you haven't done your homework. And if you'd just dug a little deeper, you'd found some more information that was key, that was essential to handle it appropriately and properly. Do your homework. Take the time to do your homework. Number 4, make a decision. Make a decision. Don't keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. By you putting off a discipline situation, people think either that you don't care or that you're playing favorites. Neither is a good situation. Make a decision. And number 5, keep a written record. Keep a written record. Now, it shouldn't go into a student's cum folder. Discipline should not follow a student wherever they go. I'm referring to internally. What's the written record for? It gives you a pattern to follow so that you can be consistent, not only in your policies, but your application of them from year to year so that you can have consistency within your school. Administrators, discipline can be effective. It's not always fun, but it's necessary. It's necessary for us to fulfill the calling that God has in the lives of our students. Would you join me in a word of prayer as we ask for God's blessing on our schools, for Him to open our eyes to what we need to do and to give us the strength to do it? Father in heaven, I thank you so much for these administrators who are attending this online summer seminar. Each of them represents a school that has a desire to do right. Father, each of us represents schools that are confronted with challenges. We need your help in the area of discipline, that we wouldn't be fearful, but instead that we would represent your power and your love and your sound mind. So please give strength, please give love, and please give clarity of thought and reason to us as we move forward and prepare for this new school year. It's in Jesus' name that I come. Amen.